Hiya, I'm Edd Bower. I'm the head of analytics at Datahawks. We did some analysis into Toggle for Airship and I got some really nice findings to take you through today. So, first of all, we'll make sure this is working. What is Toggle? Now, hopefully everyone does know this, but obviously just to kind of cover it off in case anyone doesn't, it's it's a gift card mechanic, but it's more than that. Experiences and other things as well. Preloaded cards. And the good thing is that it links up with loads of different systems, EPOS, e-commerce, feedback, and loads more. And it's really trackable. You can see when customers are using it, when they're redeeming, and you get loads of really good information through Toggle like that. It is and it's e-cards generally, really, rather than the kind of physical ones that we see. A quick chat about the data that we looked at. So what we had, what we were going through. The nice and boring slide that we always have to start off with, a bit of caveats, of course. In terms of what we need to do before we just get stuck into things. We looked at a period of between September last year, so 2021, to January this year. So quite specifically as well, looking at that Christmas period and what's the kind of juicy bits of information that we can really tease out of it. We did the usual thing of tidying up the data, getting rid of any kind of erroneous or strange bits of data that might have been in there. And we just looked at sales and redemptions because that was kind of the key figures that we wanted there. Now, one thing that we did find out, which is kind of an interesting finding actually, any of the recipients, so if I bought a card and I bought it for someone, that person is a recipient, none of the people who were recipients of cards came back as a purchaser. So there could be a good opportunity there in terms of marketing, trying to push for people who have received cards, how we could kind of coax them into, return the favor to someone else. Obviously, then they're buying more cards. We've also got a few graphs in the presentation, some of which we're looking at the count of the sales, count of the redemptions. This is how many times in that period we've seen a sale occurring. And similarly, we've got the amount of sales or redemptions. That's the value, so the monetary value that we've had for sales or redemption there. Now, the key thing is we always have to say this is, the data that we've got is what we're reporting on. We're not kind of adding in any anecdotal evidence or what we've heard or seen. This is just what the data tells us is happening there. In terms of the data itself, we had a very good amount, over 600,000 rows of data. So this isn't a kind of tiny bit of analysis. This is a full-on, huge piece of work that meant, these findings are very robust with what we've got. In terms of how it breaks down, well, about 280,000 unique customers were able to identify in this data. So lots of people there, 110 of which were purchasers and 170 were recipients for those cards. When we look at that, we've got around 328,000 unique cards that have a sale or a redemption after we've kind of like tidied up all the data there. So lots of stuff that we've kind of dug into here, some really meaty things. Now, we'll first have a look at the sales, so how it's performed in terms of over this data period. So with the overview, just over 300,000 sales of gift cards through Toggle. That made up, again, just over 10 million of sales. And the average kind of purchase value on those cards is £33.57. Now, remember that figure because we'll kind of come back to that, which is quite important when it does come to Toggle. In terms of how that looks over this period that we looked at, we see December clearly there has the highest percentage of count of sales that have gone through, but also importantly, it's got the most spend that is going through. So people are more giving when it comes to the Christmas period. And this is also December, the key month we'll be looking at here, because with Christmas just around the corner, it's knowing when to push the marketing and how to push the marketing. There's clearly a bit of a rise in November as well, but December is where the key one is. And that's just what those kind of two blocks are also saying there. January, it really does drop off in terms of sales, but that's kind of what we expect to see where, we've got that big rise up until Christmas. And then January, we do see a kind of a drop off in general trade, really. When we look at the day of when these sales are happening, it's fairly even across the board. We do see Friday being higher there, but Saturday and Sunday are much lower. So this is the purchases of the cards, the sales. Now, Friday is the highest. When we actually look into this, and we'll come on to this in a future slide, Friday for this being higher is partly because Christmas Eve falls on Friday, and we see a huge amount of sales on Christmas Eve. Now, when we take Christmas Eve out, it kind of levels off with Thursday. So Thursday and Friday are where most of these sales are coming through. So when we look at this from a marketing perspective, well, we could say that really you want to be pushing this during the week rather than the weekend, because that's when people are more likely to be purchasing these cards. When we look at just December, we can see that the 23rd is actually the highest. We've also got the sales count being the lowest on 26th, so fairly understandable. As we said earlier, Christmas comes and goes, then it sort of drops off there. We do also have a bit of a spike around the 14th of December as well, but the thing that we would love to be able to dig into, if we knew like the gender, I wouldn't be surprised if we've got a lot of guys here that are buying presents last minute, Christmas Eve, they're buying gift cards. Again, really good opportunity to kind of capitalize on the marketing then of when and how you send out those comms, because we can see when that peak period is for the gift card sales. I remember that December is the highest overall, so this is the absolute peak of when the sales are hitting, really. In terms of the amount, so the purchase on those gift cards, the highest sales was around, again, 24th. So slightly different, because most cards are actually on the 23rd, but 327,000. So a huge amount that is going through around that kind of Christmas Eve, day before Christmas Eve period. Again, drops off just after Christmas, but this is a fairly similar graph to the slide before, so not much of a change here. We can see that that peak period again is just before Christmas, those kind of 5 days leading up to it there. Now, we also did a little bit just looking at the sales counts of where these sales are all coming from. The web store, as you can see, that's where the majority of the sales are, particularly for the actual spend percentage as well. So clearly there's a thing there to be driving as many of your customers to that web store as possible, because that's more likely where those sales are going to be happening. And that is that block's saying the same thing there as count and sales. Monetary value is the most there. So when we look at redemptions, how does that look? 172,000 in the period of redemption. So again, quite a large number, but you'll remember that in terms of the number of cards that were sold, quite a bit higher. So we've still got a number of cards that haven't been redeemed yet, although we've only gone up to January, so they could be redeemed later on. This is still worth 5 million in terms of the redemption value, but the average redemption is £28.26. So that is lower than the average value that is purchased with these cards. So now, whilst the remaining balance may get kind of redeemed later on, what we do see a lot with Toggle, and it's one of the big things, is that they have a pretty good breakage figure, which is, the money that is left on the card that's never redeemed, that's cash in the tills at the end of the day. When we look at it by month, it's actually fairly even across the board. So customers are always kind of like, they're redeeming these cards quite regularly. Even though we have a huge kind of spike in sales in December, January doesn't have that same kind of proportional advantage over the other months of just how much redemptions are happening. It is the highest, but not by a long shot. And again, that block's just saying that January is the highest there. When we look at the actual redemption days, this actually flips a little bit from, we know that the sales of the cards are happening Monday to Friday, but the redemptions are happening between Saturday and Sunday. Now, this could depend on how you've got your card set up, whether there's any terms and conditions, when you can do the redemptions and such. But Saturday and Sunday, by far, the highest days for the redemption. So another thing to bear in mind when you think about kind of any marketing and how you do that kind of T's and C's that come along with the card there. Monday's got the lowest, but that does kind of tie in with, I would imagine, your trading conditions in your business anyway. When we look at the redemptions in January, because we're expecting a lot of those sales in December, we're expecting a lot of that kind of redemption to then hit in January. We can see that 22nd of Jan is where the highest is, and the lowest being the 31st of Jan. Now you can see the spikes hitting fairly consistently there. The tip of that spike, that's the Saturday, and around the spike is the Friday and the Sunday. So we can see there is consistently that the weekends are when most of those redemptions are coming in. In terms of the amount, we see again a very similar graph to the previous slide. We've got the spike, that's the Saturdays, that's when it's all hitting. And with both of them, it does drop off at the end of the month. Now that may be because, again, people have got these for Christmas and they're kind of redeeming those during the January period. In terms of the redemptions that are made in the data period, we looked at how long it takes for these, on average, for these redemptions to take place. Now, this graph is actually showing two different versions. We've got the entire data period, and then we've got the cards that were sold in December. So is there a kind of difference there? When we look at the entire data period overall, we've actually got 33%, quite a lot of the cards that are being redeemed on the same day that they've been purchased. So there's an interesting kind of two different types of customers who are buying these cards quite clearly. And then there's a bit more of an even spread of the customers who are taking, 1 to 7, 8 to 14, 15 to 13, 31 plus days to redeem the cards there. So some do actually take quite a bit of time. When we look at December, the same day is still quite high, but we see that the 15 to 13 and 31 days plus, that's much higher. We see that the people receiving these for Christmas presents are more likely to redeem them when it comes into that January period. So yeah, 33% on the same day when it's the whole data period. And then when we look at December, it's actually 15 to 30 days is the most common that we see there. So it was quite a quick run through in terms of a bit of a summary of what we've just covered off here. The sales, always highest in December. That's for both the count and the amount of those sales. Friday is the busiest. Still the case when we kind of take out Christmas Eve, but it kind of gets more parity with Thursday and Friday. The web store being the highest percentage of sales that we see for, again, the count and the amount. And then in terms of when we look at redemptions, January is the highest month. Not as much as the difference in the sales, but it is still the highest for redemptions. And we can see that Saturdays is the peak of when those redemptions are happening. And then finally, that average time between the first sale and that redemption, as an overall average, is around 16 days when we look at it. But depending on whether we're looking at the whole period or just like the kind of ones that were bought in December, that does change slightly depending. But as an overall, 16 days is what we're looking at there. That is our insights into the toggle deck. And it is toggle time, baby. Thank you very much.